Okay, YouTubers, listen up. Get your thinking caps on. I'm going to give you more education about the subject money than you can even believe. I've noticed that there are three different categories of people I've encountered regarding subjects of money. The public doesn't have a clue is one category. The investor looks at investing and increasing their profits. They don't have a clue. The New Agers who claim to be talking to some alien species are using vague information to describe money as energy. They don't have a clue either. I'm talking about money with Merrill Jenkins, who has all the practical information and asks the bigger questions with all these YouTubers that are just uninformed, educated people. I'm going to give you the information from my research, which is better than anybody else at this time in history. I'm going to teach you the subject money, not investing. I'll repeat it again. I'm going to teach you the subject money, not investing. Now, the basic information I'm going to show you through my research is reading and watching Merrill Jenkins, who wrote the book Money, the Greatest Hoax on Earth. Yeah, there's a typo there. It should be capital M. There are two very good videos of Merrill Jenkins on YouTube discussing things, one with the Federal Reserve, St. Louis Federal Reserve guy, and one with Pat Emery. Please read those first. Mr. Jenkins did more research than anybody I know in human history about the subject money, and I challenge any of you to tell me otherwise. He challenged the IRS as to what we're using as money based on the laws, the legal tender laws, which he showed you that you cannot say that a dollar is a Federal Reserve note and a Federal Reserve note is not a dollar. Federal Reserve notes are in denomination of an imaginary dollar and there's numbers on them. They are not the same thing. As you read his book, Money, the Greatest Hoax on Earth, he has basic truths that you cannot refute. Watch the two videos and understand his book. Next, you will look at the wording on all the paper money over time since the Coinage Act of 1792 and the Coinage Act of 1965. The reason I state that you must look at the above legal tender laws is because the law that remedied the continental dollar situation in this country, yes, the worthless continental dollar, unredeemable continental dollar, they had to remedy the situation. The founding fathers created the Coinage Act. This law defined the size of the coins and the weight of the coins that we're using today in 2025. So anybody that tells you the Coinage Act of 1792 is not law, they don't know what they're talking about because they're holding on to silver and gold coins that are referring to the law 1792 to this date. The public doesn't seem to understand this and they ignore the law that was written a long time ago, but that's what these coins are referring to when they are made at the mint. Think about that. The U.S. Mint creates coins based on the Coinage Act of 1792. The people that you listen to in the media keep ad nauseum saying that the government is printing money and the government or the Federal Reserve is printing money. That's not the problem. This is not the problem. It's a deceptive, uneducated, ill-conceived way of explaining this, and I will go on to this in depth further. You must look at the wording on the paper money over time. It has changed. You got to think back from the 1800s. The state banknotes were redeemable in gold and silver, and we're referring to the Coinage Act of 1792 up until 1895. Yes, the state banknotes circulated up until 1865. The gold and silver certificates were redeemable in gold. We're referring to the Coinage Act of 1792 and were issued in 1865 and respectively 1978. You guys got to think and you got to read the Coinage Act because that's the starting of your education. In 1913, they were circulating silver and gold certificates, and they were redeemable. They were redeemable in silver and gold and the Federal Reserve notes up to 1933. Well, that's an incorrect statement, but all three of these were circulating at the same time in 1933. The Federal Reserve notes, the silver certificates, and the gold certificates. Think about that. That's not in your history books. The gold certificates and the silver certificates where the money was the silver and the gold, and the people owned it and it was theirs. They brought it to the mint, and the mint verified the size and weight of it, and they owned the money. They owned the silver and gold. They didn't own the Federal Reserve notes. I'll repeat that. The people didn't own the Federal Reserve notes in 1913 when they were issued, and they don't own the Federal Reserve notes today. That's a myth, and that's a lie. That's incorrect and uneducated statement. Think about that. You have Federal Reserve notes, and they're not yours. Your school textbooks and most of these investors don't tell you this. It's more uneducated people saying more uneducated things. So I'm giving you the facts. When you go through the basics of my teaching, your next level of learning is understanding what we're using as money. It states in the law What are we using as money? It says silver and gold shall be used as money in the Coinage Act of 1792. That's the first time I saw the phrase as money. Gold isn't money, it's being used as money. Federal Reserve notes are being used as a medium of exchange. So correct your English. The only way I can explain to you this is ask you a question about the money supply. How does the supply of money increase? How does the money supply increase in the entire country? Where does this new money come from? People don't understand this simple question. They can't give you the answer because they haven't been educated in the textbooks. Misinformation that we hear is the printing of money or the banks create the money. This is a factual lie. Banks don't create the Federal Reserve notes. They don't create the money. The money is created at the Bureau of Printing and Engraving and at the U.S. Mint. Aren't you passing around a physical paper? Well, then don't say the banks create money. That's a lie. When somebody says the banks create the money, that's a lie. Just ask them, what are you talking about? Because you got to be specific with people because they'll manipulate you and confuse you in their confusion. The paper is the money. We're using it. We're passing it around. The banks don't create the piece of paper. The paper isn't created at the commercial banks. Now, as I stated before, the loans create the money supply, which is the numbers on the promissory notes at the commercial bank. I'm going to say that again. As I stated before, loans increase the money supply, which is the numbers on the promissory notes at the commercial bank. You just had a deer in the headlights look and your jaw dropped. You said, what are you talking about? You said, what? People say to me, I've had hundreds of people say to me, I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah, really? When you go to the bank, you sign a promissory note, which is a loan document at the commercial bank. You agree to borrow imaginary dollars of money. You're not borrowing silver and gold. So what are you borrowing? Dollars of what? You see, if you read the Coinage Act of 1792, Section 20, you'll realize the dollar is an expression of the money. So you're borrowing an expression of the money, a number. That's why you're playing the con game. You don't even know what you're doing at the bank. You think you're borrowing dollars of Federal Reserve notes, which is not true. Federal Reserve notes are factually not dollars. This is a fact. I want you to read this 3 times. They are denominations of dollars. Federal Reserve notes are not dollars, and dollars are not Federal Reserve notes. I want you to read that like 5 times. Federal Reserve notes are not dollars, and dollars are not Federal Reserve notes. So as you see, you look back when I say that word dollar is an expression of the money. It's not the money. I'm going to repeat it again. The Coinage Act of 1792, Section 20 states dollar is an expression of the money, and that law has never changed. The money was silver and gold in coin form, or a quantity of silver and gold in coin form. All of a sudden you're saying dollars are the money. What, really? Where does the law state that dollars are the money? I've asked hundreds of people, where does the law state that dollars are the money? They don't know. They shrug their shoulders and go, I don't know. You don't know what you're talking about. Really? So I bring you a bunch of facts and evidence, and you're telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. That's your answer because you're ignorant and you don't know your way out of the situation, and you're afraid to admit your ignorance. There isn't a law that states dollars are the money. Now, the Coinage Act of 1965 factually states that the Federal Reserve notes are for all debts, public and private. Let's stop and think for a second. The Coinage Act is a legal tender law regarding our money. It states Federal Reserve notes are for all debts, public and private. Think about that. That law does not state dollars are for all debts, public and private. Think about it. Put them. I've highlighted them. So you're saying the dollars are the money, really? Okay, well, the law could not state that dollars are for all debts, public and private. Why? Because those who wrote the law in the Coinage Act of 65 knew that the dollar is an expression of the money based on the Coinage Act of 1792, Section 20, which was still law in 1965. Those of you that ad nauseum keep stating the dollar is the money, none of you have said to me, where's the law? You haven't shown me the law. You're just ignorant. You're following the assumption, and you're double-minded. As the saying goes, a double-minded man is unstable in all ways. Now, until you believe that you're borrowing nothing at the bank when you're taking out a loan, I can't help you. But I've laid it out for you in plain facts. You're signing a promissory note, and you're the one that's going along with a fraudulent situation as to what you're claiming you're borrowing. I didn't understand this. I was ignorant too, and at least I admit my ignorance, and I've educated myself over years of research. You're borrowing nothing at the bank. I'm telling you this right now. The public refuses to understand that they're borrowing nothing from a bank. Proof of this is we don't use Federal Reserve notes as currency. We don't need to use Federal Reserve notes. We can throw all of them away, burn them. We can have a cashless society. Think about that. You can have a cashless society right now with all these tech devices and computers. The tech device and all the computers are just using an accounting system. That's right. They're not counting anything. They're not counting gold or silver. They're just claiming you're counting dollars, which is not true. You got your brain so mixed up thinking Federal Reserve notes are dollars. So if you throw the Federal Reserve notes away, what is the money? Well, it's a number in a computer, really. How can a number be the money? That's the preposterous and absurd situation. That is ridiculous. Only a confused person would agree that dollars are the money. An expression of the money is the money. That's ridiculous. When you claim you're sending money or transferring money, all you're doing is changing the numbers in an account. That's it. Since let's play the game and we throw away all the paper money. The tech device just sends signals to the other tech device. It didn't send any money. It just changed the numbers in accounts. You're not counting anything as money. You're claiming the dollars are the money. That's not true. You're brainwashed. You can fool all of the people all the time, and almost all of you have been fooled. I was too, I admit it. Now, all of the commercial banks are just changing numbers in an account. They're not transferring money. There isn't any gold or silver. You don't need the Federal Reserve notes. Think for a minute. There's no gold or silver in the banks. You're just using numbers as an accounting system. How do you send numbers to a computer? How do you change the numbers in a bank? You're like Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz. You're so confused. You don't know which way is out or which way is, you don't know, your brain is confused. If you don't have any pieces of paper as evidence of the money, you've removed the Federal Reserve note. You just have tech devices. The tech devices are just doing what the bank's doing. They have an accounting and they're changing the numbers in the accounts. They're not sending numbers anywhere. You don't send a number to the bank. You don't send dollars. You don't send money. You're just sending a signal to the computer to change the numbers in the account, and you're counting nothing. You have to believe this. You're counting nothing. You're counting an imaginary thing called an expression of the money. It's like you're counting empty containers. That's ridiculous. You're saying there's something there, but you're saying, well, the container is the Federal Reserve note, or the empty jar is the money. There's nothing in the empty jar. You so badly want to believe that there's something there as money. The Federal Reserve note is just an empty container, an empty vessel. It's exactly like that. There's nothing there. There's no there. You refuse to believe it. That's your fault. I've given you the information laid out here on a silver platter. Learn it and read it so we can vote in true politicians who aren't completely ignorant as the rest. It's a fraudulent accounting system claiming you have money. Money cannot be numbers. Numbers are the quantity of something, are the expression of the quantity of something. There isn't anything that is to be used. There isn't any gold and silver as money. So wake up, people, because we're being scammed and we're being conned. We've got to vote in intelligent people and get rid of these compulsory education laws and these legal tender laws and change what we're doing. We've got to get back to living off the land. If you think you don't, go ask the Amish, see what they're doing. You've got to use wealth as an exchange, and people have to create the wealth and exchange it as barter. And that's it. Learn